And then Section 106 review, when NEPA is also required, is completed under that umbrella. And this is a way to graphically show how all that works. You see NEPA at the top, the different other evaluations that will occur as part of that process, and then historic resources that we're focusing on today is in orange on the left hand of the slide. Again, DPD, my agency, and CDOT, we are considered the applicants for the purpose of 106, and we will be facilitating the rest of the 106 process on behalf of the Federal Highway Administration. So, loving historic preservation and a bureaucrat, I love this slide. This is from the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, where it essentially lists the different parts of the 106 process. And you can see that today we're on Identify Historic Resources. And for those of you that are on the line, we're on slide 15. Initiating the process, many of you received invitations or you have asked to participate in this process. So that I'm sorry.
Ask everyone to mute their phone again, and if they're specifically here, not to listen to the call-in, because it's you're like a 5-second lag on the call.
I'm sorry, we have to interrupt just to ask folks if you're on the line to mute your phone. And if you're in this room, please do not use the call-in number. There's some feedback that's happening on the line. Thank you. So again, we've already initiated the process, inviting you all here, determined the undertaking, as I just went through the definitions of that, and that was determined by FHWA. And we have developed a rough schedule of public input opportunities following the Section 106 guidelines. So we are on number 2, to identify historic resources, and that would include determining the area of potential effect. Again, we'll go into more detail about that later. Identification of historic resources and their eligibility for the National Register, and then reviewing this with you, our consulting parties. This is the kickoff, and we anticipate that this phase will go through spring of 2018. The third step will be assess adverse effects. And I know I've received some letters already from folks here that are concerned about adverse effects of these proposed actions. We acknowledge that there is a stage to discuss those. That stage is not today. That will occur after we have already identified the historic resources. And we do need to follow this process. It's mandated as the 106 process. But we will take those comments. Those letters are being entered into the record, and we will include comments from today to be brought up in that phase. And then the fourth is resolve adverse effects if needed, and we anticipate that happening later this year. Again, a reminder that Section 106 is the process we're focused on today, but the NEPA process will also include its own public meetings. Those will be advertised as part of the website listing that we have for the other public meetings that will also be scheduled by our Parks District as well as the Obama Foundation. And finally, the NEPA process will result in a public hearing. And that will be something that is advertised as every public hearing in the newspapers, and there will be plenty of lead time for that for the public to attend that as well. So who are the participants? I've been referring to people off and on through this presentation, and here's the listing. The federal agencies, again, with the Federal Highway Administration as our lead agency, but also we have the National Park Service, we have the Army Corps that are also involved. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation that will help guide us through this process. And consulting parties, and you see that we've broken it down into entitled consulting parties as well as invited consulting parties. And in general, consulting parties are all invited to comment and review the proposals. Even the applicant, the City of Chicago, CDOT, and DPD were considered consulting parties as well. And finally, the public. the public is invited to these meetings, and they are also invited to offer comments. So the specific role of a consulting party is to participate in our meetings. And we urge you that if there is someone in your organization that has been assigned to this, but they're unable to come, please try to keep the continuity and send someone else from your group and share this information. And then provide comments to us on the project documents as they're presented, either paper documents or any information that we're supplying through these meetings or through our website. We would appreciate it. We really need your help to keep this moving forward. So to date, 76 entities have been invited and 50 have accepted. A clear listing is on our website as of yesterday. There is a PDF of all of those folks, and this is also on the handout that you received at the door. If you know of anyone who wishes to be considered as a consulting party, please sign up outside the door, and we'll reach out to them, or they can email us directly through our website. Consulting parties are decided by the Federal Highway Administration, so they will be the final arbiter of who is a consulting party in this process. Okay, well, that was all the background. So we're about halfway through the presentation. I'd like to get into some detail about the Section 106 process, and specifically the project that we're discussing today. And we are on slide 20 for those of you who are on the line. So what is an area of potential effect, or the APE? This is a geographic area where the project could potentially have an effect on its historic resources. And for this particular project, we've defined 2 APEs, which we'll discuss. And those are archaeology and architecture that this project could affect. So archaeology, what you see on this screen shaded in aqua, and again, these are available on our website for closer review. We will also have boards at the end of this meeting where you can look at these and talk to staff people about your thoughts. The archaeological APE is really defined of where we're doing ground disturbance or proposed ground disturbance, and that would be for the roadway work as well as for the construction of the OPC. And that is how that was defined. An archaeological survey has then been started by the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, and you may have seen them in the park. They had started last month, and with the warm weather that we've been having, they've been able to get quite a bit done. They will be continuing into next spring, and there will be a report on their findings. What is their goal? It's to systematically test the soil in an even grid across the areas of potential effect, to test the soil for the presence of significant resources that will provide new information about the park and this area. So the architectural APE, and I should state that this will not just be architecture, this will be structures, this will be bridges, statues. We have a whole lot in this APE. It also includes landscape, and that is a very important part of this whole review. So the architectural APE defines the area of historic resource identification in those areas I just mentioned, as well as will be the boundary by which we assess the effects when we get to the third stage in the process. The boundary was drawn to take into account the development pattern of the historic resources, such as how the properties around the park developed. It's larger than the archaeological APE because of the potential direct visual impact or indirect impacts on historic resources. And because this is a fairly large APE, we've broken it up into 3 distinct sub-areas for review of historic resources based on what we already know and the methodology to accurately record historic resources going forward. So we're on slide 24, and this detail of the architecture APE is focusing on Jackson Park. And it's important to note that Jackson Park and the Midway are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So already these areas are considered a historic resource. But what we're doing as part of this project is more fully documenting the individual resources within the park, not just what could be affected by the proposed project, but everything. And then again, in stage 3, we will assess the effects. So as I mentioned, we have a few subcategories or subsections in this large APE. So another subsection is the area that is east of the Metro tracks, and we will be looking at potentially eligible buildings, since this is not on the National Register, through survey, looking at a description of the building's history, and then finally, National Register eligibility. Doesn't meet criteria to be considered a historic resource for the purposes of 106. And then west of the Metro tracks. This is an area on the north side of the Midway that is largely part of a National Register district as well, part of the Hyde Park Kenwood Historic District. And again, all the buildings within that historic district on the National Register could be if they're not already established as contributing to that district, we will evaluate them and do a second look to see, do those need to be considered eligible historic resources within that National Register boundary. South of the Midway and along the Midway, we will be evaluating those buildings that are not included in the National Register district, again, through survey, research, and making a determination according to National Register criteria if those are eligible historic resources for the purposes of this review. So I keep talking about the National Register. We thought it'd be good to have a slide to remind everyone what National Register means. So National Register is a program that is available nationally for communities to protect and suggest historic properties in their neighborhoods as a historic resource that will be listed and recognized as a resource, as a historic resource. And these are the criteria by which they are evaluated to determine if they're eligible to be considered a historic resource. And this can be done both for an individual building. There are many singular buildings that are listed on the National Register, as well as for districts. And that would be like the Hyde Park Kenwood Historic District, where it's a grouping of buildings that have a similar development history or architecture. So this is what we'll be using as our guide after we identify buildings that are 50 years old or older, and go through these criteria to determine, do they meet any one of these? And it also must possess significant integrity, meaning that it still needs to convey some of what makes it a historic resource. It can't be altered beyond recognition. I do want to add, for those of you who like mid-century modern architecture, and I know we have quite a bit of it scattered through this area, that there is a provision in the National Register to consider buildings that are less than 50 years old. And that will also be a discussion point that we'll have to look at as part of this work. Okay, so that again is more process and how we're going to approach the project. This is really the fun part, which I think most of you already know, for those of you who live in this area, where we're going to talk a little bit about the history. And I really need to give kudos to our park district, as well as their historian, Julia Bachrach, who for many years have been stewards of Jackson Park and have really cataloged the history and are responsible for putting this park on the National Register in 1972. So Jackson Park has an illustrious history of really, hosting big events. As you may know, the Columbian Exposition, and it's had many notable plans done, many with the name of Olmsted in it. And the landscape architects associated with the various iterations of plans through time make this park significant and are a big part of why it's listed on the National Register. And this is just a short list of various milestones and notable historic milestones for the park. And I do want you to note that at the end, in 1972, again, it was placed on the National Register. So as I mentioned, Frederick Law Olmsted is intrinsically associated with this park. And his name and many successor firms that carried that name are associated with the park planning that happened here, starting with a plan in 1871, and then again carried out by the successor firms. This plan that we see here today, though not fully realized, really created a lot of the landforms and connections that we see carried out throughout the park today. So I had a question for our historian. If the park evolves over time, how do we evaluate its significance? It's not as easy as a building. And our discussion ended up with these principles. And this is something that I'd really like feedback on from our consulting parties, that these are principles that all the successor planning firms kept in mind as they were making changes to the park. That these were the principles of the lake, fields, lagoons, the Columbia Museum as a focal point were very important to keep in mind as different changes were accommodated in the park. So the specific historic features I mentioned, the park in general is listed on the National Register. But I want to give you an example of how we're cataloging these features and how we're breaking them up into categories. So I'm going to flip through a few of these slides. And for those of you on the phone, I'm on 33. And again, due to the good work of the Park District and Julia, we have many of these documented. And this is an overall map of the park in the midway. And what you see starred and listed off to the side are the historic resources that include buildings and structures that have been noted as a historic resource. We want your help in letting us know, are there any we missed? What do we need to add to this list? And again, we'll have folks outside that can take your comments. You have a copy of this map on your handout, so you can mark that up and hand it to us. And again, send us your comments via email too, as this process goes on. But what we're doing is taking photos and documenting each one of those starred images. And that would include not just a photo, but a description and a date, if we can pin it down to a date of construction. I mentioned the landscape features, very important, and those will be documented as best we can, and that will be a good discussion when we get into assessing effects. Buildings and structures. Again, noting the names, the historic names of the buildings, what they're used for now, as well as the dates of construction. We do need to look at integrity here as well, too. How much of the property still conveys its historic character. More buildings and structures. Again, you know, this can be everything from the yacht club to the maintenance building that will be included in this survey. Bridges. We even include the viaduct here, the Metro Viaduct. This was in place, or a form of it, during the Columbian Exposition. That's why you see such an early date on this, 1893. Monuments. Statues, benches. So that's just a taste of what will be our task in the coming months. This is what we've done already for Jackson Park. We will, again, need to do this in connection with the neighborhood the neighborhood groups and in the AP area that I mentioned in both Woodlawn and Hyde Park. So I'm on slide 40, and at this point I want to again remind everyone where we are in the process before we talk about next steps. So what's outlined in red and highlighted is this is the identification stage. We've shared with you where we are, what our methodology will be going forward to define archaeological, architectural, landscape elements. And we do want to review those with you before we continue on to the next step of assessing any effects of the proposed projects on those historic resources. I think this is a good time, again, to remind you that the other processes will be continuing throughout this process as well. So we'll have some Park District meetings, we'll have some NEPA meetings as well that will continue as we make our way through the 106 process. So what does this result in? Once we gather all this information, how do we memorialize that we are completing step 2? It takes the form of a historic properties inventory report, and that will be done for the architectural APE. And again, identifying the potential historic resources with photos of the resources and an analysis of historic eligibility. And those will be based on the National Register criteria that I mentioned halfway through the presentation. That report will be reviewed by the public and by you as consulting parties. And that report we'd like to email out to you 1 week before the next scheduled meeting, so you have a chance to look at it and we can have a really good discussion about where we are at that point at the meeting itself. And then all of this will be done in consultation with the SHPO, and FHWA as our lead federal agency will make the eligibility determinations. So for our next meeting, please come prepared to discuss the report. And as I mentioned, it will be emailed out to you, so please make sure that we do have your contact information and email addresses. We'll have a discussion about that report and start to talk about assessing the effects to those properties based on the projects and the undertaking that have already been defined at this meeting. A reminder that you can check out our website. All of this information will be on the website, the PowerPoint, the maps, everything that's here, so you can take a closer look at it. Email us at any point. We're happy to talk with you and meet with you as well. And again, I'm Eleanor Gorski. Abby Monroe has been checking you all in and reaching out to you to make sure that you've received our invitations. And again, John Sadler has been prominent in the neighborhood for many months discussing the CDOT projects. So we're going to do a general question and answer time right now to see if you have any questions about the overall view of what I've just presented. And then, as I mentioned, we will have boards in the back that will have where you'll have the opportunity to talk with us one-on-one. So if you do have questions about an individual property or a resource, I would ask that you save that for that time. And we will be asking to limit everyone to 2 minutes per question, and Abby will be walking around with other staff with the mic. For questions that are important, but I may not be able to answer or may be more appropriate later on in the process, Susan will be writing those down. We will keep track of those, post those on our website, and then we will bring those back at the appropriate time in the process. Okay, so with that, we'll open it up to questions. Sure. Are there any questions about the process? We already have hands. Wait a minute, second question. And are there any historic features to add to the list?
Thank you. Russell Pike, I'm the president of the Jackson Park Highland Association, which is a community within South Shore. That name also honors Jackson Park. We're on the southern boundary of that community, our community, and it's a historic landmark community. One question is, when is the Obama Foundation plan supposed to be submitted? I thought it was going to be in January, but it looks like your process is going to extend that longer. Comment, though, from our neighborhood, we took a survey, and I would say 87% of the households within that neighborhood are in support of the Obama Foundation's plans to put the presidential center within Jackson Park. We look at the structures. There's been comments about some of the buildings, but as far as the tall building, which there's been some apprehension about, I see that as a beacon of hope / a beacon of change, a beacon of involvement from the community. It's good to see all these people here from South Shore, maybe not from South Shore, but still the interest in South Shore I think is important. We need something like this to assist us in developing this community so we can be a thriving community within this city. We have the good, the bad, and the ugly within our area, and I think this opportunity would be a good opportunity for the Jackson Park Highlands Association as well as South Shore. Thank you.
Margaret Schmidt, Jackson Park Watch, and we have two questions, a two-part question about the definition of what we're doing. And the first question is the location on all of these maps of the Obama Presidential Center as proposed is not the location that was designated in the ordinance that the City of Chicago passed, giving the Obama Presidential Center the opportunity to be in the park. So we think that is a very important issue that needs to be addressed very early on. Is that discrepancy going to stand through the process? Is it going to be regularized? What is happening? Secondly, a similar issue, you are proposing, even though this is called the OPC mobility improvements, in quotes we would say, this includes closing Marquette Road. Marquette Road is not related to the Obama Presidential Center in any way, shape, or form. It is only related to the proposal to consolidate and expand the two existing golf courses into a new PGA type golf course. And we think that also needs urgently to be addressed at the very beginning of this process so that we all know what we're talking about.
Thank you. So this review is related to the South Lakefront Framework update, the plan that's being done by our Park District now. The roadway changes as proposed, as I mentioned, have been discussed since 1999. That would include Marquette in the 99 Framework Plan. This is something that is being pursued in the latest framework plan and is not contingent on golf, which is why it is under review at this time. It's part of the framework plan. The Obama Center, the moving of the site, again, we are responding to what is being proposed at this time. The city process, as I mentioned, will be a parallel process through council and through Plan Commission, and we anticipate that that will continue through next year. And for those of you who may not be familiar, there are public meetings as part of that process as well, and we will be updating our website as those occur.
So, two questions. I'm Louise McCurry, President of Jackson Park Advisory Council. We spent the last 10 years coming to lots of meetings like this, and usually there are 5 or 6 of us here, because usually nobody cares what's happening in Jackson Park. So it's really exciting to see everybody interested in Jackson Park, because we think it's an amazing place. The question I have for that goes with the history and the historical part of this park is the 67th Street Beach, which for all of my years working and cleaning and preparing and getting that beach back in shape for people to use again was the resource for the south side of Chicago. It's not been included in any of the beaches, but it was the place where 4,000 to 5,000 people came every weekend and spent their weekends and enjoyed it. It used to have a bridge going over to it, so the people from Woodlawn could come to the beach. That bridge was taken down, and now we're going to have an underpass, which pleases me enormously, so kids can come back to that beach again, because the 67th Street beach is a treasure. Secondly, it's a wonderful thing that we're looking at the resources inside the park. One of the things that didn't get covered were the many contributions that were made by African American citizens to the park, including the amazing golf course that has an entire network of people who are involved in making that golf course the place that it is. Olmsted would be so proud to see that the first African American president is going to have his center in Jackson Park, because Olmsted was a man who went through the South and documented in a book called The Cotton Kingdom all of the years of abuse and hangings and lynchings that were happening throughout the South post-Civil War. He then put out some of the money to make the Haitian Pavilion a reality, so that in fact that gateway into the park would be met by an integrated eating area and a place where whites and blacks could sit down together and have a wonderful conversation. So for me, the Haitian Pavilion is huge. But the 67th Street Beach isn't on the list, and I'd like to make sure it gets added, because that's a place where people who were not of the right language and right religious persuasion could come together and have a day at the beach in the south side of Chicago. So I'd like to add that to the list.
Thank you.
Hi, Naomi Davis, Blacks in Green, Bronzeville Regional Collective, and of course the Obama CBA Coalition. In noting the landscape features category of the areas of potential impact, I am struck by the absence of the word trees, and I am, of course, everyone knows that, trees are part of the setting, and of course the potential of some clear cutting, mature trees, hundreds if not thousands. And so I'd like for there to be a specific accounting for, analysis, disclosure, measure of those impacts. I mean, we're environmentalists, but we also recognize that, you're clear cutting the Amazon. We've got environmental impacts from the Norfolk Southern and other diesel particulate. The trees are the lungs of the planet, and we certainly know that we need to increase them and not decrease them, and so that would be an issue. Also, just in terms of the process, oh, and by the way, on behalf of the Chicago Region Tree Initiative, we're very concerned and a member of that. So regarding the process, as an applicant, you have an advocacy role. And I just want to distinguish that those of us who are measuring and tracking this process closely, that the word improvements presumes, the word improvements is a conclusion. It is not a fact. And so we just want to distinguish that as an applicant, you have a particular stake that is not neutral, and you shouldn't be neutral, you're the applicant, but it is a context that is important to distinguish.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Dan Marriott. I'm on the Board of Trustees for the National Association for Olmsted Parks. And I wanted to just make a note in terms of identifying historic resources that Cornell Avenue and Hayes Drive are part of the historic circulation system for the park, which was an integral part of the park's design, and that the history of those circulation systems be considered as identified resources going forward with this. And echoing the comments of the previous speaker, would recommend or suggest that rather than referring to the proposed changes as transportation improvements, there be more neutral terms such as potential transportation changes or alterations until there's a general consensus as to what is an improvement or not at this point. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elisa Starks. I represent a number of organizations or consulting parties, namely Jackson Park Highlands Association, where I live, also South Shore Works. I just wanted to clarify something about the process. I think I heard you say that part of the studying that will be done on historic places will include Woodlawn and Hyde Park. There was no mention of South Shore, and while I know this won't impact all of South Shore, as previously stated by Russell Park, Jackson Park Highlands is very near there and also a historic landmark district, so I'm wondering why it would not be considered as part of this.
That's a great comment, and that's really what we're looking for at today's meeting, particularly on the area of potential effect. How this was determined, again, was looking at the development related to the park itself. So at your end, the south end of the park, it was considered that the strip of properties, and I believe a lot of them are multifamily properties that face the park in that area, and then the Highlands start?
No, the Highlands starts on 67.
So that is something that we can look at evaluating, but we were at the north and south ends just taking that first line of buildings around the park, but if we're mistaken, we'll take a look and see how it developed as part of the Highlands. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bonnie McDonald. I'm the president of Landmarks Illinois, which is one of the consulting parties as well. And I don't feel that we received a clear answer about the iterations of the Obama Presidential Center design. If we're to give a clear indication of impacts from our position, we need to have real-time presentations about the design iterations at the center. So can you give us a better understanding of the timeline for design iterations coming forward?
Sure. Again, the site plan is the site plan that we saw in May, and that will continue to be what we'll use for this process. As for any further refinements of that, it is my understanding that the foundation is planning to introduce in early next year a refinement of their plans.
Hi, I'm Mike McNamee with Save the Midway. And we have two questions, and so we'd like to know, would the Department of Planning and CDOT consider looking at all of the Midway as a part of this process, since the Midway is currently, the parameters for the development of the Midway, as I understand it, are currently come under the 2000 framework plan of the Park District, and the while the current South Lakefront framework plan is being developed, I think the original document is still the one which was approved by the community and is the document that stands. And then second, we would like to know if, as a part of this process, the Obama Foundation would share with us some of the ways that they developed the statistics that they based their parking garage, the number of spaces, and the other parking resources in the area that they looked at, so that we could that would help us to review the parking garage part of this request.
The parking garage will add to the list for the Obama Foundation as they refine those plans. And then as for, I believe your comment was to expand the APE to include more of the Midway. We'll take that under advisement, and part of what determines the extent, the western extent, is the visual impact of the undertaking. So that will be part of the studies that are done as we move forward with this. So we will definitely include that in the review. Thank you.
Do you want to read a question?
So we do have some questions from across the street that have been delivered. So I'd like to read one or two if I can. Both the Jackson Park and the Midway Plaisance are in themselves historic properties. We know that a parking garage is not included in the framework plan for the Midway, which is still operative. Will this be recognized as an adverse impact on the Midway? I think the answer to this would be in stage 3. That's something that we need to look at after we finish stage 1, identifying historic properties.
Hi, I'm Jawanza Malone with the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. We're a member of the Southside Obama CBA Coalition. And I want to state for everybody here, because I think some people have a misunderstanding, we are not opposed to the Presidential Center at all, but there have been structural deficits to what's been presented to the public that we are just really trying to address, and a part of our push for a community benefits agreement connected to the Presidential Center. So one question is just if we could maybe go back to the slide in the presentation, but just clarify the approval process around the recommendations that are coming forward from the Presidential Center, because what we, I believe, haven't seen and wasn't really clarified today either is just the negative impact on the schools in the area and the safety of the young people. It essentially turns Stony Island into an expressway to accommodate the closure of Cornell Drive. And then just, again, clarifying acre for acre replacement of the parkland and recreational facilities that's going to be lost as a result of this, as well as the toll on the taxpayers. I think we haven't heard a clear sense of what it's going to cost taxpayers for tearing up Cornell Drive, converting it to parkland, and just all the other infrastructure improvements that's going to be needed to make this possible. With placing this in parkland, that means electrical lines, gas lines, sewer lines, et cetera, are going to need to be placed in there that taxpayers are going to be on the hook for. So just what the cost is. And so if we could, I don't know if it's appropriate to work into this process, just having a financial plan or projections included so that we can better understand just the full impact of this. Thanks.
Thank you. You've touched on a lot there, and all are certainly part of the overall city reviews of these projects. But I think that you did answer your own question at the end, that those will touch upon the 106 process, but the processes that those will be more fully vetted would be the NEPA process and the further effects that you're talking about. In terms of the taxpayer issues, that is something that should be done through the local city council process, and that will run parallel with this 106 process. Now, the parkland issue and the UPAR issue, that is something that will be discussed as part of 106, and that will be done in 3 assessing effects of the road closures and the roadway geometries, the change of the roadways, and how that could be mitigated in terms of total parkland.
Hi, Mary Lou Seidel with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. First question is, will there be a way for people who are on the phone to ask questions since they are muted? But I have a question from someone on the phone. 2 questions from Charles Birnbaum from the Cultural Landscape Foundation. Are you applying the guidelines for the treatment of cultural landscapes when you assess landscape features? If so, historic, visual, and spatial relationships should be evaluated for adverse effect. And second, the National Register nomination is 45 years old, and there are other landscape features now eligible. What is the status of the National Register update of several years ago? Hope I did okay by you, Charles.
Those are both great comments, exactly the type of comments that we're looking for. So we fully recognize the National Register nomination is not what you would do today. It's not as thorough as what would be done. So that is, that's why we're going back through and doing the inventory and the analysis, of which I gave examples of. And then we will also look to use those guidelines that he mentioned. We'll record those, and that can be added as part of the process. So I think we are taking some questions. Oh, no, Ward or? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
And then we'll take questions from the phone. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. You know, we have some general concerns about any changes to this Olmsted Design Legacy Park. And we realize how important this park is to Chicago and also the nation and the world as an Olmsted-designed park. And we just want to express our concerns with any type of big changes or additions to the park. As far as expanding the APE, we'd like to also, we've heard a lot of concerns from neighboring communities, including South Shore and the Jackson Park Highlands. I think it would be really good to also consider the buildings of the South Shore Country Club, now Cultural Center, as part of this plan. We've seen over time there was a huge effort 40+ years ago to save these buildings, and while some of them appear to be in good shape, others like the stables are not. And as we're looking at this whole lakefront plan, if you will, and these major changes, I think it'd be really critical to include the designated Chicago landmark and all the buildings, historic buildings of that site, in all of these documents. So we just want to suggest that.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to take 1 or 2 questions from the folks on the phone. If your group hasn't been already represented in the room here, feel free to speak loudly, and we'll see if we can hear a question or 2. Does anyone on the phone have a question they'd like to ask?
Are you able to hear people on the phone?
Yes, we can.
We can hear you, but
if anyone's asking a question, please check to see if you're on mute. Okay, well, we'll return to questions in the room then.
Can I read 2 quickly that I think we've already answered, but I want to acknowledge from across the street? Ward, another question: why is the South Shore Cultural Center and grounds not included in the review? And also to go towards your question, Ms. Starks, about the southern boundary and where it is. So someone's questioning that. So we'll definitely look into that further. And then a question similar to yours, Bonnie: how can the Section 106 process be initiated in terms of proper due diligence without a final plan from the Obama Foundation?
Eleanor, thank you very much for this presentation. It's very helpful, and I can see you guys have worked really hard at this. Jack Spicer from the Community Task Force for Promontory Point. I was surprised to see that the entire Promontory Point is drawn into the architectural landscape version of the APE. I'm sure you have good reasons for doing that, and that will all come out later. But in the meantime, if you're going to do that, could you please identify all of the landscape and architectural features that are noted?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that's a pending National Register nomination as well, correct? Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Donald Magruder from the Midway Place Science Advisory Council. I'm actually, my question wants to skip to 4, the resolve. I'm looking to understand, so what, and forgive me if you've gone through this, but I want to just kind of for clarification.
Sure.
If you go through the Section 106 process, and we find that there's some disagreement here, based on what's on in the map, what recourse actually exists? What will we be able to do? Will we be able to compel some changes? What options would we actually have at the end of the day?
Did you want to say anything, or if you could?
Yeah. That's a very good question. John Sadler with the City of Chicago Department of Transportation. As you can see here, this is part of a process. What we're here today, again, is to identify what is of historic value or potential historic value. As we move forward with the plan, there will be, as consulting agencies, remind you that as a consulting party, and Midway Plaisance is a consulting, advisory council is a consulting party to us, you will be receiving additional information regarding the historic resources which we have found. As we move forward in the process, that information will be balanced against potential effects to those. During that, there'll be a consultation period with the individuals and the consulting parties as part of the project to determine exactly that. What are our options? But that is part of the process as we go through what is shown here on the screen as part of our option 4, or as part of alternative. What's shown here is resolve.
Good morning. My name is Flora Digby. I'm here representing one of your consulting partners, Southern Shore Yacht Club. as well as our other 2 partnering yacht clubs in the area, Museum Shores and Jackson Park. I think it's fair to say that we are very excited about what's happening in the community and very excited to see that there's more coming to Jackson Park. We are also excited to see that more of the city of Chicago is going to get a chance to experience the maritime fun opportunities that we explore every year. It's a very exciting thing. We have a few challenges as well, because if the desire of the project is to bring more of the city to the maritime activities, I think that we need to think about what we're doing in terms of the street closings, because access is going to be key. You're looking at closing Marquette, you're looking at closing some of the streets that are just paramount to access to the 3 harbors. And so as we think about moving the project forward, we definitely want to think about what will we do if we close those opportunities of access. What other opportunities that we have? We know that we can access them via Lakeshore Drive, but we're still closing out some of the city. Of course, we know that we're doing that to bring more park area and to experience the new golf course opportunities, but we just want to think about what we're doing and just make sure that if we close some doors, that we open some other doors. There are some wonderful things that we're doing. We're doing boat training. We're doing just bringing education to the city of Chicago, power boat training, sailboat training. We participated in the city of Chicago intern project this year where we brought students in and taught them about boating and taught them things that are important and growing up. And so we just want to say we're happy to be participating in the project, but we also want to think about access. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Joshua Vanderjat, assistant principal at Hyde Park Academy High School. It was a long drive over here this morning. I just want to actually piggyback on the idea of doors opening. The Obama presidency marks a significant moment in our country's history, and the opportunities that our students might receive and doors opening through with the Barack Obama Center, literally right down the street and possibly across the street from our students, them walking by those buildings and opportunities every day, is really exciting for the administrative, the staff, and a large number of our school-based community members and family members. It's something that we teach in our history classes and our civics classes, and the opportunities that we see with the Barack Obama Center coming to this community is that our students can learn that live from those that lead and facilitate the buildings and the resources available at the Barack Obama Center. So we're excited. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Malcolm Williams. I'm representing the One Woodline consultant part of this whole thing. And my question, my suggestion simply is, given this extends beyond the park into Woodline, as a resident and a community leader, we're concerned about how it impacts our neighborhood from a historic perspective. And we're hoping that you all will share that with the residents.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Will Crosby. I'm a disabled person. And I've been going to this park since 1953, and I just want to raise some issues. I was involved with the Coalition to Save South Shore Country Club, getting on the historical register, and then we were tricked. They stole all the rooms from the top floors and changed the whole building around. It's not like the original building was. That's the park district. So they weren't truthful what they said they were going to do with the park. Then I've been a drummer here at 63rd Street Beach for the last 50 years. And we've been bringing culture to our park. And with the closing of all these streets, people can't come to the park. I'm a disabled person. It's bad enough having been at Jackson Park, which is a historical spot right there on 63rd, up Hayes Drive, and no washrooms that the children can use or no places for people to sit down. And I mean, that's a historical park already. I would take it, but it's been neglected. So I'm just wondering, even though we're having this great discussion now, what has your agency done in the past that relates to these parks that are on the historical list, in terms of stuff being not kept in place that it was historically? And so, you know, I'm just wondering if you can explain the process a little bit better, because I don't want to be tricked like I was before.
Yes, thank you, sir. A lot of the resources and other pieces and amenities within the park that are directly associated with things beyond the potential roadway or the conversion of UPAR process, there are the community meetings that were presented here earlier today on the 7th and 11th for the Park District. So some of those aspects will be discussed at that point. Particularly, they're trying to find exactly what issues you may have as it relates to the park and the beach amenities.
Hi, my name is Lauren Malton with Friends of the Parks, and thank you for your presentation. I guess my question is, given that the 106 review is to determine the adverse effects of the Obama Presidential Center on this historic park, would a conclusion ever be at the end of all this that the adverse effects are too great for the Presidential Center to remain in the park, and would it ever consider moving it to vacant land that is not park land?
Sure. You know, we can't predetermine what the outcome of this will be, and I think, as John has stated, this is a process for us to go through, and to have discussions. I mean, that is the project, as part of the project and the undertaking that we're considering.
Hi, my name is Sandra Bivens. I'm the Executive Director of the 51st Street Business Association. I'm a member of the Bronzeville Regional Collective, and I'm a resident of Woodlawn for 33 years. And I want to reiterate the question that the young man had here, because no comment was made on it. I see you all are going all the way down to 63rd and Woodlawn. I live on 63rd and Kimbard. I want to know what kind of effect that these historic designations are going to have on us as residents living in the neighborhoods that you all are doing this study on.
So the stage that we're in is simply identifying, right, the historic resources. And then the effect that the proposed project will have on you, that is something that we will assess. Now, were you asking long-term in terms of if you're considered a historic property, what that means for you?
Taxes, lack of improvements, things like long and short term, because you know when you become a historic designation, you only can do so much with your property. There's certain taxes. I mean, these are the things that we as community residents have to think about with what's getting ready to happen with this study.
Thank you. No, we recognize that, and as part of this process, those are conversations we're going to need to have. Again, we're at the beginning stages, so I think until we know what we're dealing with, it's hard to go into detail about that, but that is certainly going to be part of a thorough community process with the folks there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susanna Ribstein. I'm a member of the South Shore Cultural Center Park Advisory Council, South Shore Advisory Council. Happy to be here. I wanted to third or fourth the comment about the South Shore Cultural Center being included. I wanted to say some of the materials seem a little bit unclear. Some of the maps include that park and some of them don't. And so I just wanted to be clear that the South Shore Cultural Center Park is a part of the area of potential effect. Is that correct?
Well, I think that this is a good time for us to mention the boards in the back. So we'll have a chance to go back there after the Q&A, which I think we need to end at this point, and take a look at those.
Okay,
So.
well, and my connected question was, again, just to reiterate that I believe it should be included, and also to clarify what you said in response to the first question about this, that the 67th Street underpass is part of the undertaking because it's related to the transit questions, but it's not contingent on the Gulf, and so what we're looking at is the South Lakefront Framework Plan. Is that correct? Everything that's included under that? And if that's the case, then does that mean that the golf course proposals are not a part of the South lakefront framework plan?
No, this process is specifically in terms of what would trigger federal review at this time. And as we stated at the beginning, it's the roadways under the Federal Highway Administration and those improvements, those proposed changes. And then 2, under the National Park Service, UPAR, Urban Parks and Recreation Act, a potential conversion of parkland to non-recreational use at the location where the Obama Center is proposed.
Okay.
So those are the 2 triggers for the federal process.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, well with that, we do have the board set up in the back of the room. We have one more question. Ma'am, we'll have you be the last then. And then we will stick around. We have a bunch of staff here, the team from Parks and my division, our consultants, and we'll be happy to answer further questions.
Hi, I'm Sharon Payne. I'm with Southside Community Organizing for Power. We are definitely in favor of a community benefits agreement. We believe this needs to be in place before any of the decisions are actually made in concrete. We also, among this, jobs need to be put in there and job training for our youth and housing, sustained housing for the people that already live here.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and thank you all for coming. We'll move to the boards, and again, we'll be available to answer questions. Looking forward to the next meeting. Okay. For those of you in the Jackson Park Fieldhouse, you're welcome to come back.